So you pay off Jeff Keighley for a Game of the Year award. You pretend that your game sold 30 million units. You gaslight people into believing that Elden Ring is one of the biggest releases of the generation. And what do? You immediately turn around and turn it into Fortnite. This must have always been the long-term plan, because I can't imagine that Miyazaki actually really thought that Elden Ring would have succeeded long-term. Because I pointed this out when the game first came out, is that, like, this is just Dark Souls again. It's just open world. It's going to wear off eventually. What's the long-term plan for this brand? Okay, what are they going to do with it? And they literally just turned it into Fortnite. They literally were just like, well, we gotta do what Fortnite does. And yeah, FromSoftware, the company that is only famous for being so dead set against like industry trends and like just the general gameplay design, they made their game into Fortnite. And right now, it's kind of like a repeat of what happened with Shadow of the Erdtree, where shit staying on the Erdtree, excuse me. It's kind of there. It's kind of the same situation, what we're seeing right now, where FromSoftware fanboys are just guzzling down like Nightreign, not willing to acknowledge the game's very obvious problems and the flaws, right? People are a bit more willing to accept that, like, yeah, this isn't the genre I wanted. Nobody cares about the multiplayer with Elden Ring. That was actually, like, a really good sign that, like, Elden Ring was kind of underwhelming, by the way, is the fact that, like, nobody cares about the multiplayer in this. But, nobody likes the multiplayer in Souls games, okay? It's just a thing for tryhards to, like, get one up over noobs, but it doesn't really add anything to the game. It detracts from the core experience. Nobody likes it. And FromSoftware, in their infinite wisdom, was just like, oh, we're going to make an entire IP based on the concept. It's like, let's make a multiplayer Souls game. Never mind that, like, the movesets of these bosses are so limited that, like, having someone else with you completely breaks the game. Never mind that, like, the Elden Ring lore isn't fleshed out enough or interesting enough to make a multiplayer game interesting, and so they had to bring in, like, characters from Dark Souls to get anybody remotely interested in what was happening. Never mind that, like, if the world of Elden Ring was Fortnite, like, why didn't we just Fortnite it to begin with? It's just like, what? This is what they came up with, This is what they produced. And what's more, they made it pretty clear with Duskbloods, the announcement of their next big project, exclusively on the Nintendo Switch platform, the superior gaming platform, the market leader. When they announced their bigger project, their next big step after Elden Ring, they made it very clear that they're going to double down on what they're doing with Nightreign. This multiplayer choose your character slop, something that nobody in the audience asked for, nobody wanted, and is becoming very, very apparent is a massive, massive misstep. FromSoftware fans are autistic. That's the reality of it. The reason why they're so obsessed with this brand is because they developed, like, this specific fixation on this idea that, like, ducking and rolling was, like, peak gameplay design, right? They think Souls is way harder than it actually is, and that they're good gamers because they can breeze through it in like an hour, right? That's the mindset of, like, the average, like, Souls, like, spurg, right? FromSoftware, like, producing games in different genres that require a more diverse skill set that are nothing like the games that, like, people claim are, like, peak. This is alienating their core audience. We are beginning to see the backlash to FromSoftware being overhyped among the general community. They are trying to, like, pull in more normies, getting more casuals, and it's just alienating the people who, like, genuinely love FromSoftware for what it is. What FromSoftware should have done was make entirely new IPs and franchises that appeal to different people, but the audience would have rejected that too. It was always like going to be like a very long, like hard road, like getting out from under Elden Ring's, getting out from the success of these games because like FromSlop just isn't going to be allowed by their audience to produce anything different. Their audience is so fixated on like the idea of what Elden Ring and FromSlop is that like they're going to get very visibly upset with any kind of deviation from that at all. Like previously, the most controversial FromSlop game I would say was Sekiro. Actually, a lot of core fans would tell you that like it was just Punch Out, it was just pattern recognition, and they don't have the self-awareness to understand that that's true for like Souls as well. But Sekiro is like a really good example of like what would happen if FromSlop made their games more action focused and less like RPG focused. Like instead of being about the build, it's about like actually playing the game. FromSlop cannot make action games. They are very slow compared to their competition. The animations are garbage. Like Sekiro is just like clearly outstripped from like games like Bayonetta, which were over a decade old at that point. Like Sekiro being more action focused demonstrated FromSlop's like unique weaknesses in this regard. The thing that made them so popular and beloved to begin with is going to be like the anchor that keeps dragging them down as they try and get away from it. Their fans, the people who are sitting there and telling you that FromSlop is the greatest developer in the industry, they don't want innovation. They don't want change. They don't want games like Elden Ring to be anything other than like open world Dark Souls. The very idea that Elden Ring is like a Fortnite clone is like appalling to them, that it's been casualized. It's wasting their time and resources when they could be putting out more of the same. But if they put out more of the same, they would be seeing diminishing returns. FromSlop is in a very interesting position where we are seeing the developer that's been put up on a pedestal over the past decade, the one that seems to have replaced CD Projekt Red, the one that's like being worshipped online. We are in this position where we're in the early stages of seeing this company fail. After all that hype, all that worship, pretending that like Elden Ring like was better than Zelda and like acting as if like FromSlop was the best developer in the industry for putting out the same game over and over again. Like this is the beginning of the end of the company, and I couldn't be more happy. I couldn't be happier to see it happen now. It's really fitting, I think, to see like Nightreign get buried by the release of the Nintendo Switch 2. It's going to be amazing seeing Nintendo fans come out and call Duskblood shit. Like it's going to be really satisfying, like being the prominent gaming YouTuber who's always spoken about FromSlop, who's always hated these games, who's always spoken out about them, make a video about how garbage Duskbloods is when it finally releases in 2026. Like it is going to happen. That's just the reality of it. I'm not going after these games because they're not on Nintendo consoles or because I'm a casual. I'm going after them because I have higher standards and understand that there's far better developers out there. The vast majority of FromSloppers don't play games and have no idea what's actually out there.